I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. We start with some breaking news from the Middle East, and that is Gaza's civil defense agency saying that about 100 people have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school on Gaza City. Well, we can go straight over to our correspondent Jenny Hill, who's in Tel Aviv. Jenny, good to have you with us. Just bring us up to date with the latest.
Yeah, this is being described as a horrific massacre by Gaza's defense agency, civil defense agency, which is run by Hamas. They say that 3 Israeli rockets struck the school in the Daraj district of Gaza City this morning. They say that the school was being used as a shelter for displaced people, and there are suggestions that those people may have been at morning prayer when the attack happened. It is then reported that a fire broke out following the strike, with emergency workers scrambling to rescue people from inside the building. Now, the Israeli military has confirmed the strike, but they say that the school was housing a Hamas command center. It's the second strike on a Gazan school in as many days, and in fact, Israel has repeatedly struck schools in Gaza in the last week or two. Each time the military insist that they are in effect pursuing legitimate targets, that the schools are housing Hamas bases. They also insist that through the use of precision missiles and intelligence, they are doing their best to mitigate the loss of civilian life.
Our correspondent there, Jenny Hill in Tel Aviv. Jenny, thanks for bringing us the latest. And I am joined in the studio now by Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic, who's also been following the very latest. Mohamed, we've seen some really devastating scenes this morning, many too graphic, too horrific for us to be able to broadcast fully. But just tell us more about what you've been seeing there.
And apparently the velocity of these smart missiles that Israel used is causing the bodies to be cut and the bodies to be unidentified. Actually, we saw different shelling in Gaza. So we saw this shelling with heavy bombs that are destroying the whole buildings completely. And we saw these smart bombs that are targeting very, very precise targets. So the difference between having a massive attack on a place that could target the 5,000 people who were sheltered in this school, that would have left us with hundreds of people dead, but targeting the prayer area precisely in the school left the school building in large intact, but the building that has been affected is the prayer area and left more than 100 people died. There were we understand that there were around 300 worshippers praying at that time when this high velocity bomb, 3 rockets, as we understand, strike that prayer area and caused this amount of deaths. But unfortunately, the horrific scenes that we saw and that we cannot present it to viewers is because this high velocity of missiles.
Mohamed, as we know, Israeli authorities say that they were targeting a Hamas command center within that school. So I just wonder, do we know then whether there was the possibility for these civilians, who presumably were seeking shelter, to receive any kind of warning about this?
In many cases, the Israeli forces would issue a warning to the people before targeting a building or a school or a hospital. They ask people to evacuate. They ask people to move from fighting area. But apparently, in this time, Israel wanted really to target Hamas members who were apparently praying at that time. We understand that Hamas members are religious people. They are an ideology. They are fighting for a cause, fighting for a sake of, as they say, sake of God, sake of their nation, sake of having an independent state. So they would be praying at that time in the morning prayer, which is happening with their local times between 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning. So when Israel just struck that prayer area, a few minutes after the beginning of the area, they would know that there are members of Hamas were praying at that area. So they didn't care much of giving a warning. They wanted that target, no matter how civilians would die in that attack.
Now, Mohamed, you and I have been looking at images throughout the course of the morning, families crowding around people that they have lost, people who are injured there at the hospital. But I just wonder, at this stage in the conflict, realistically, what kind of hope is there for the health system, for these hospitals, to actually be able to really save the lives of people who have been injured, to treat people, when we know that the health system, of course, has really been facing the consequences of this ongoing conflict?
Unfortunately, the health system in Gaza cannot deal with such incidents. There is only one hospital working in Gaza, which is Al Ahli Hospital, is partially working. The hospital that we saw a picture of is Shuhada Al Aqsa, is not working properly. Al Shifa compound is out of service. Al Ma'madani Hospital is out of service. There are many hospitals that are out of service. I heard reports that are saying many doctors were arrested by the Israeli forces. Many doctors were killed. This system relying so much on the foreign aid, or also the doctors that are volunteering to come from foreign countries or other countries to come and help in their leave time or in their free time. But unfortunately, the hospitals, they do not have enough equipment, enough medications, or enough facilities to deal with that. And this is the biggest question now. If there are more than 100 people died, there are maybe a similar number of injured people who cannot find any medical aid, and unless the world would do something for these people by rushing to save their lives and making sure that they are civilians worth to be live and give them the opportunity to heal and continue with their lives.
And viewers will just be able to see there on their screens the very latest pictures there of the scene at that school there in Gaza. Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic across the very latest developments in this story. As ever, we thank you for being with us. Well, we can speak now to Ayman Saikal, a Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the Australian National University. Thank you very much for being with us. We know that more ceasefire talks were expected to start next week. In light of what we have been seeing and what we've just been discussing there with our correspondent Mohamed, that strike on the school in Gaza, over 100 people killed according to Hamas authorities. Where does that leave the situation in your assessment?
This further complicates the process of negotiating ceasefire, and it is a slap in the face of all those countries, and that is Egypt, Qatar, the United States, United Arab Emirates, which have really wanted a ceasefire to be enforced. And it is very clear that the Israeli leadership does not want a ceasefire, and they are still determined on their original aim that they must really wipe out Hamas. But in the process, they are also killing so many civilians now, and that's why the whole thing has become so horrific. And the Israeli attack on this school really comes on the top of attacking two other schools in the last week, which have resulted in the killing of scores of innocent children, which basically amounts to an Israeli policy of trying to wipe out the second generation of Gazans so that they are not going to be able to prevail in the future.
And as we know, Israel has said that it is targeting a Hamas command center at a school there. But just taking a look at the picture more broadly, we know that Yahya Sinwar, now the head of Hamas, all of these things taken together, how do you think this has complicated the possibility for peace, for any kind of meaningful breakthrough during those upcoming ceasefire talks?
I mean, as you said, it is making it very complicated, and this is we were told by the Israelis months ago that they clear Hamas out of the Gaza city, and yet they keep continuing bombing Gaza cities and also all those areas which they have said that they have destroyed Hamas, and how long they are going to really continue to do that. They can always claim that there is Hamas members somewhere, and as a result they can kill also hundreds of innocent people, and this is what is really happening. And I think in the view of many analysts, this constitutes what can be called state terrorism. I mean, this is what Israel has been trying to do, and it's become extremely provocative and basically trying to inflame not only the Palestinians but also all those people who sympathize with the Palestinian cause in the Arab world and the Muslim world.
And of course, as we know, the US, UK, among those governments which view Hamas as a terror organisation as well. I just want to talk about the broader backdrop of this, and that is, of course, Israel waiting to see if an attack from Iran arises. How closer do you think this war could be edging towards spiralling into a broader conflict here?
Well, it is really edging towards that, and of course there is a lot of pressure on Iranian government at the moment to restrain itself, but at the same time not the equal amount of pressure has been put by the United States and other allies of Israel to restrain Israel from these provocative actions. Israel has continued to target Hezbollah figures, Hamas figures, as well as Iranian commanders and sites. And that does not really serve the cause of bringing about peace and stability. I think we are at a flashpoint at the moment. And if Iran and Hezbollah carry out their promise of responding to Israeli attacks, then we will see the beginning of a major regional inferno that nobody may be able to control it at the end. And I think this is now the right time for the United States, particularly for the Biden administration, to really pull Israel into line. And they can only do that by stopping supplying of arms to Israel, which enable Israel to continue this war not only against Hamas and Gaza, but also targeting other supporters of Palestinian cause in the region.
You mentioned there the Biden campaign. I just wonder how you think that this will be viewed internationally, cognizant of the fact that the Biden administration is now also looking at a Harris campaign. Do you anticipate any pivot in strategy from the US, bearing in mind it is the closest ally of Israel?
Well, Kamala Harris has voiced stronger support for a ceasefire and also observation of human rights by Israelis in Gaza. And of course, that is irritated the Israeli leadership, particularly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think this sort of massacre cannot really help the situation as far as the Democrats are concerned. And I think now the Democratic candidates will have to really come out and to express their horror about the whole thing. But then on the other hand, you have the Republican candidate, the former Prime Minister Trump, who has said that if he wins the election, then he will give the whole of the West Bank and Gaza to Israel. So there is a real debate going on in the United States at the moment, but Israeli lobby is also very active in the United States to make sure that only those who are elected that support Israel and it remains absolutely committed to Israel supremacy in the region.
And we should just say there that Israel once again says that it was targeting a Hamas command centre in a school. We are nevertheless seeing a very high civilian casualty number. Mohamed ستعقد, Professor of Middle Eastern Studies at the Australian National University. We thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
And we turn now to events in Russia, and Moscow is introducing strict new security measures in 3 regions bordering Ukraine in response to this week's surprise incursion by Ukrainian forces into the Kursk region. Now, there are also concerns from the UN nuclear agency, which has urged both sides to exercise maximum restraint as fighting moves closer to a nuclear power plant. Well, fighting's been raging since Ukraine's army launched its surprise incursion this week, with reports suggesting that they could be operating up to 30 kilometres inside Russia, with intense fighting close to the town of Suja. Francis Reid reports.
Filmed from a dashboard, then uploaded onto social media. Abandoned and burned Russian troop carriers in the Kursk region. The person who posted these pictures has since been arrested, but the BBC has verified the footage. Ukrainian assaults on Russia started on Tuesday and seem to have come as a surprise. Several villages have been seized. This footage from the Ukrainian military is purported to show Russian soldiers surrendering. Reports suggest the focus is happening just north of Ukraine, with fighting thought to be concentrated near the town of Suja. Moscow says up to 1,000 Ukrainian troops are involved in a region which contains a nuclear plant. The UN nuclear agency has urged restraint, but the astonishing images of Russian jets bombing Russian territory seem to run counter to the Kremlin's official narrative that the war in Ukraine has been going to plan. President Putin holding a meeting with his Security Council. It's calling the Ukrainian incursion terrorism. And Russia is now bringing in reinforcements. But no act goes unpunished. A Russian missile attack on a supermarket in the eastern Donetsk region has proved fatal, although it's not clear whether it was a direct response to Ukraine's cross-border assault. Anya was there. We started climbing out of the window, she says. We were barely outside when everything started burning. I started running one way, my colleague ran the other way. Ukrainian emergency services have been searching through the rubble for signs of life. No respite for those living this reality. Francis Reid, BBC News.
And we can speak now to our Kyiv correspondent, James Waterhouse. James, good to have you with us. Are we any clearer as to understanding what Ukraine's aim here is in this surprise incursion?
I think if you look at the pictures you've just seen, I think that reflects what Ukraine was after in the short term at least. Russia is putting more and more resources into trying to contain this offensive. We've seen a lot of men and machinery moved in the direction of Kursk and neighbouring regions along the border as Ukrainian forces seemingly take more and more territory. And they've even been frustrated in that endeavour, with one convoy certainly being destroyed. And now we have what's being described as a counter-terror operation, a counter-terrorism operation by the Kremlin, which gives powers for cars to be searched, for phone tapping, for vehicles, the movement of vehicles and people to be extremely limited. This is something Russia is having to take seriously. And I think for Ukraine, the hope is that it will relieve pressure on the front lines on its own territory, where it is Russia continuing to advance. It's important not to understate how significant this week has been, because this has been a war, certainly for Ukraine, of grueling familiarity. And here we've had this sort of strange inversion where you have the sight of Russian civilians reacting with fear and anger in some cases and leaving their homes. This is something that we see across Ukraine continually. And it really has sort of shaken things up in that respect. Ukraine has increased the stakes, and in this war of territory, where Russia often talks about wanting Ukraine to concede land in exchange for peace, well, now Ukraine controls a chunk of Russian territory. It really is a high stakes move, and it could, we are still talking about Ukrainian forces that are overstretched. So it's been an extraordinary few days.
It has indeed. Briefly, if you don't mind, you were just mentioning there how high stakes all of this is. Do we have any kind of intelligence as to understanding whether Ukraine can continue this incursion in Russia whilst also trying to hold the front lines in its own country?
We don't. I mean, at the moment, the colonels and generals and senior officers are being incredibly tight-lipped about this operation. But what we understand, what we can glean from the front lines, is that the issue of military aid, after political disagreements among the West, that's partially been resolved. Equipment is arriving on the front line, but Ukraine is grappling with its own domestic challenge of mobilising enough men. So, it was seen as counterintuitive at best to send clearly elite fighters into Russia in this way. But if it forces some kind of concession politically or in a military sense by Moscow, then it will be seen as worth it.
Our Ukraine correspondent there, James Waterhouse, speaking to us from Kiev. As ever, great to have you reporting. Thank you, James. Well, investigators are trying to work out what caused a plane crash that killed 61 people in Brazil. President Lula has expressed solidarity with the families and friends of the victims, and the São Paulo state governor has declared 3 days of mourning. Well, the flight from the city of Cascavel came down on the approach to the international airport in São Paulo. There were no injuries on the ground. Our correspondent Ione Wells has the latest.
No time to prepare for landing. Only a terrifying spiral to the ground. Just miles short of its destination. Its final moments, captured by horrified onlookers on their phones. This was a short internal flight from the Brazilian state of Paraná to São Paulo, never reaching its destination.
It went down nose first. I thought something had happened, that it had run out of gas. I ran out because I live near there.
I thought it was going to fall into our backyard. It was scary, but thank God there was no one killed on the ground.
57 passengers and 4 crew members were on board. Local authorities say there are no survivors. News reached Brazil's President Lula da Silva while he was speaking at a conference. He held a minute's silence. He said all his solidarity was with the families and friends of the victims. There are no answers yet for the friends and families of those on board. Only unimaginable grief and shock. Ione Wells, BBC News in São Paulo.
Well, let's just take you back then to that developing situation and story there in Gaza, where we have seen an Israeli strike on a school where, according to Hamas officials, over 100 people, many civilians among them, have been killed in that strike. These are the latest pictures. You can see the scene of that strike there. Israel saying that it was targeting a Hamas military command centre inside that school. We have been discussing these latest developments with Mohamed Taha from BBC Arabic, who has been joining me in the studio. Mohamed, this coming at a very critical time when we know as well Israel anticipating the possibility of a retaliatory strike from Iran, a very tense moment.
Yeah, it's a very tense moment that we were expecting to see a retaliation from Iran or from Hezbollah for the killings of their leaders, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, or Fuad Shukr, the leader of Hezbollah. But as the Israeli security cabinet took a decision recently to do a preemptive strikes, though strike in Lebanon, they killed Samir al-Jamal, which is the Hamas leader, in Mukhayyam, in the camp of Ain al-Hilwi in southern Lebanon. And they struck Gaza, as we can see, more than 100 people killed. They struck in Syria, and they struck in the West Bank as well. And the analysts are saying that yes, it is a very delicate moment, that we were expecting Iran and Hezbollah to strike back, but it is very delicate moment also, as we are expecting all parties to sit on the negotiating table on Thursday. And analysts are saying this is an indication from Israel whether they do not want a ceasefire, they do not want end of this war, at least now, or they want Hamas to say, as a response of this mass amount of civilians loss, that they do not want to negotiate. So, and we are expecting a press conference from the authorities in Gaza in half an hour, and we would say what they are going to say.
And of course, I know, Mohamed, Taha, you will be across those latest developments. As ever, great to have your reporting. Well, you're watching BBC News. Remember, you can also get the very latest, of course, on our website. That is bbcnews.com. I'm Helena Humphrey here in London. We'll have more news for you at the top of the hour, so do be sure to join us then at the top of the hour if you can. Bye for now.